Um, how is that going to play out in the election? That's a good question because, of course, now you have very justifiably a lot of anger among Palestinian Americans, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, and people are trying to kind of strategize whether they should, abandon Harris, as in like just not vote for Harris, vote for a third party, which I think would be a mistake, and so on. I'm not sure. That we're going to have to see in the next few weeks. Just also remember that the political kind of structure, the political system in the US makes it so that really those that have probably the most leverage are those who are in particular states. So for example, here in Massachusetts, where I am, it doesn't matter, right? The state is going to go blue no matter what. But it's a question of what's going to happen in a place like Michigan in particular, right? To
I
some degree,
see.
maybe Georgia.
Some hopefully we'll have some positive return for the people of Gaza at the end of the day. Thank you very much, Dr. Noah, for your precious insight. And we move now and we give the floor to Mr. Ken Roth, esteemed American attorney and human rights activist and writer. Mr. Roth, you have the floor now, please.
Okay, thanks very much. Let me just say a quick word on Kamala Harris, and then what I mainly want to focus on is the International Criminal Court. But first with Kamala, I mean, I think it's quite clear at this stage what she's going to do, and her acceptance speech at the convention illustrated this. She will speak out strongly about the suffering of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and she will reiterate how the Biden administration is pressing hard for a ceasefire to try to curtail that suffering. She will not touch the big issue before her, which is whether the US government would restrict arms sales or military aid as a way of pressing Netanyahu to accept one of the ceasefire offers that's on the table. And the one exception to that has obviously been Biden's willingness to stop sending these awful 2,000-pound bombs to the Israeli military, which were used incredibly indiscriminately with devastating effect throughout Gaza. But apart from that, Biden is not taking that step. Kamala will not take that step. She's going to try to get by saying, I hear you're suffering. I want a ceasefire to end it, period. Now, she's calculating, and I'm not sure she's wrong in this respect, that when push comes to shove, people may not be happy with this, but to either abstain, to just not vote, or to vote for a third party is effectively to vote for Trump. And, especially if you're in Michigan. And that a vote for Trump, if Trump were to prevail, will be so much worse for Palestinians than if Kamala were to prevail. And I think, I actually agree with that. So I think it would be a mistake not to vote for her, even though this is an opportunity to press her to take on the arms embargo issue in particular. Now, what I wanted to address is the International Criminal Court, because the issue now has been joined. The court has heard from both sides and is likely to issue a judgment relatively soon whether to affirm the prosecutor's request for arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israeli Defense Minister Gallant, and the one remaining Hamas leader who has been charged, Sinwar. I want to put forward basically the four arguments that have been made for why the court should not affirm the arrest warrants for the Israeli officials, and just address each one of them. And I anticipate that the court's opinion will have to do this. Now, one which I don't know that any government is actually actively pressing, but has been sort of lingering in the background, has been the US government's view that the court should not exercise what's known as territorial jurisdiction. That is to say, Israel never ratified the court's treaty, the Rome Statute. The only reason the court has jurisdiction is because the state of Palestine is given it jurisdiction. And the US government for many years said it's inappropriate to prosecute somebody from a country that hasn't joined the court just on the basis of this territorial jurisdiction. That's an argument it made in Rome more than 20 years ago, and it lost overwhelmingly. Only 6 other governments voted with us, one of them being Israel. It still was the US position for 20 years until the US abandoned that position because of Ukraine, because the court's charging of Putin was based on that same territorial jurisdiction. Ukraine had conferred jurisdiction, Russia never joined the court. It's the exact same thing as the situation of Israel, but Biden said this act was justified. Even Lindsey Graham, who was, the South Carolinian Republican senator, one of the leaders from the Republican Party with respect to international foreign policy, he's embraced the court. He said, Ukraine has changed our view. And so the US government has basically abandoned its objection to territorial jurisdiction. Even today, it's not explicitly putting that forward. So I think that objection is off the table. Now, a second objection, which the US government is asserting, and it seems Germany is asserting, is to say that Palestine is not enough of a state to confer jurisdiction on the court. And, obviously, Palestine is not a full-fledged state, but the UN General Assembly has given it the status of a non-member observer state, which has been deemed enough for Palestine to ratify a series of human rights treaties, including the Rome Statute of the ICC. And frankly, we should welcome that. It reflects a commitment to respect human rights, even though that commitment often falls short. But this has been paralleled by a growing number of governments that have recognized Palestine as a state. And indeed, it would be sort of ironic if the ICC were to say, Palestine isn't enough of a state because Israel continues its illegal occupation, even though the International Court of Justice just said that occupation is illegal. So I think the idea of the court rejecting this state argument is I think it will reject the state argument. The pre-trial chamber already did by a vote of 2-1, a close vote. But now that it's being reconsidered as a contested matter, I still think the likely result is saying that Palestine is sufficiently a state to confer jurisdiction. Now, an alternative to this argument, and here various governments are arguing this, is that even if Palestine is a state, it gave up its rights to prosecute anybody under Oslo. And if you look at the Oslo Accords, they indeed say that Israel takes charge of prosecutions. But the recent International Court of Justice opinion about the occupation cited Article 47 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which very appropriately says that in a situation of occupation, nobody's rights can be bargained away. Even an agreement between the occupying power and the occupied power to abandon certain rights cannot be recognized. And that makes sense because there's a complete unevenness and imbalance of power. You don't want an occupied power being coerced into giving up rights. And so the Oslo Accords, this section having to do with with who gets to prosecute, I think the ICC will say that that is not enough to abandon the rights to prosecute, that's what Article 47 of Fourth Geneva says. So I don't think that argument is likely to prevail. Now, the final argument put forward, and this is being by Germany more than anybody else, is to say that the ICC has what's known as complementary jurisdiction. That is to say, it's not the primary jurisdiction. It only is supposed to step in if the national power in question is unwilling or unable to investigate and prosecute conscientiously. And what Germany has said is that it's unfair to expect Israel to be investigating the charges that have been put forward, basically Netanyahu's and Gallant's starvation strategy in Gaza, because the war is ongoing. And it's unfair to expect Israel to investigate itself during a war. So just wait. Don't issue the arrest warrants now. Wait until the war is over with. Now, I don't know a military prosecutor anywhere in the world who would buy into that argument. Germany didn't even advance that argument when it came to Putin. Obviously the war in Ukraine is still going. Germany never said, Russia can't be expected to investigate itself because the war is ongoing. This would just make a mockery of humanitarian law, saying you only enforce it after the fact, you don't enforce it during the armed conflict. So I think it's very unlikely that the court will endorse that theory. All the more so because Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor, twice visited the region, was very outspoken that his top priority was the siege, the blockage of food and other humanitarian aid. And one, he wanted it lifted, but two, there is no indication that the Israeli government launched an investigation. Indeed, to this day, even after Netanyahu and Gallant have been charged, there's been no public announcement of an investigation. So in essence, this would be, just an endorsement of doing nothing, an endorsement of impunity. So those four arguments, I think none of them is going to prevail. And I expect the court will systematically reject at least the last three. I'm not sure anybody would even dare put forward territorial jurisdiction as an issue. But that's how I anticipate it will go. I hope we see the result sooner rather than later.
Mr. Roth, thank you very much for this very deep explanation of the role of the International Criminal Court, and we can say also the international law in holding the role in holding those responsible accountable. And I know it's a kind of difficult to sum up everything, especially these legal terms in that's such a short amount of time. But I think our audience have got a very good idea about what's going on the level of international law. Thank you very much, Mr. Roth. And now we will move to Mr. Jim Moran, former Democratic member of the U.S. House of Representatives. And Mr. Moran, you have the floor now, please.
Well, thank you, sir. I'm going to feel a bit like the skunk at a picnic. I very much appreciate that you're focusing on an issue that every citizen of the world should be focusing on, and I appreciate the sentiments of the two previous speakers. The young lady from Massachusetts brought to our attention the campus protests on the American university campuses, and the second gentleman referred to international law. So this is about morality and law. It should be, but it's not. And morality and law is not going to make a difference, unfortunately, because morality and law get trumped by money and the media. And the reality is that the US Congress has decided that they care more about money and a favorable media than they do about doing the right thing, in my opinion. Every day, war crimes are being committed in Gaza. And yet, the United States continues to send money for the purpose of buying weapons, actually $20 billion of weaponry, the most lethal weapons that we have in the American arsenal, weapons that we wouldn't even use, let alone on a civilian population, 2,000-pound bombs, 500-pound bombs. I've got a list of all of the weaponry that has been sent to Israel, but perhaps even worse than that, we provide political cover for the Netanyahu government, which is proving itself to be not just a right-wing government, but a fascist and racist government that is deliberately committing genocide, ethnic cleansing of the Gazan population. I do think that their ultimate objective is obviously not a ceasefire. It's not to gain release of the Israeli hostages. It's to remove the Palestinians from Gaza, to force them into Egypt or any other country that will take them as refugees. This is a government that the people of Israel should be ashamed of. Some of them are. The U.S. should have no business cooperating with a government that is using our money, our material, our political cover to commit genocide against an entire civilian population. The atrocities that are occurring in Gaza are so much greater than what occurred in Bosnia. And yet the United States declared that to be a genocide. They knew that there were snipers, Serbian snipers that were deliberately targeting innocent civilians. We were horrified. Of course, we knew that because there was some media getting out of Bosnia, and it convinced President Clinton finally to bomb Serbia, Belgrade, which resulted in an end of the war. But the journalists in Gaza have been killed, have been intimidated, have been evicted, if they were lucky, frankly. So very little Western media coverage has been provided of the atrocities that occur every day. And most of these atrocities are committed against women and children. If the American public was exposed to this, I do believe that most Americans would want their government to do something about it. But unfortunately, there's very little that can be done. The Biden-Harris administration has been bad on Gaza. They've been complicit in this genocide. But the Trump administration would be worse. His only dictum to Netanyahu is get it over with. He'd give him all the weapons he wanted, and his only suggestion is do it faster, do it in a more lethal manner. So I agree with the two previous speakers that the American electorate should be voting for the Harris-Walz ticket, because at least they express some sympathy with the Gazan population. But I can't suggest that it's going to mean a change in policy. The rest of the world should speak up. The rest of the world, Europe in particular, should not be so feckless to do nothing. The British government was particularly feckless, and Starmer's government is not much better, even though it's a Labour government. The European Union is as large as the United States. It has an economy almost as large, but it defers to the United States, probably because we have a military that's 15 times what most militaries are able to do. You can take the next 15 countries combined, and it's not equal to the amount of money we put in to our military, over $950 billion, maybe almost $1 trillion. And yet to have part of that money plus foreign aid going into committing war crimes on a daily basis because of the politics, because of the campaign financing, because of the control of the media, it's inexcusable. It's an indictment of what has become of this democracy. It's an indictment of the fact that our foreign policy has been Israeli-centric. And let me say one other thing so that people don't particularly accuse me of being anti-Semitic, although I'm sure many will. Many of those protests across the country were led by Jewish students. My wife went to Cornell. There is a disproportionate representation of Jewish students on the Cornell campus. Most of those academic institutions, such as Columbia, have a disproportionate number of Jewish professors who know what the right thing is. They are students of the Enlightenment. They know that what this Israeli government is doing is wrong, and yet they have been suppressed. There's an organization called the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism. They were funded by the Israeli government to lobby the US Congress to divert attention from the destruction of Gaza to the harassment of Jewish students on American campuses. You wouldn't think that this would be an achievable objective, but it was, because the Congress was all too receptive, particularly the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party didn't say much in opposition, unfortunately. They were in violation of Foreign Agent Registration Act, and yet they feel that they're exempt from American law and have proven that that's the case. So I'm disgusted at what's happening. I think the rest of the world would be too if they were fully aware. I appreciate the fact that you are making an attempt to make them more aware. Unfortunately, in this political context, it's a quixotic mission. And for that, I'm deeply troubled. But thank you for including me in the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moran, for this lovely insight. And I have one.
Did you say lovely insight?
Yeah, something like this. Would you please just elaborate on the point of that nothing can be made politically to stop this genocide? Sometimes we think it's a kind of pessimistic idea, or it's a very realistic idea. What do you think?
It's real. It's genocidal what the Israeli government is doing. And among themselves, they will acknowledge that. But let me say one other thing, since I'm getting a little emotional here, which every citizen of the world really should. You know, there are as many Muslim Americans as there are Jewish Americans. And within the Jewish American community, it's very much split. It's possible that a majority of Jewish Americans agree with what I said. They're not right wing. If anything, they're left wing. But where are the Muslim Americans? A handful are engaged in this. And yet they contribute very little to the political process. They're not sufficiently organized. My sense is that there are more Jewish students protesting what's happening in Gaza than there are Muslim students, even though some Palestinian American leaders have been excellent. But they're a slim minority. The protests at the Republican convention were so-so. At the Democratic convention, they were minimal. Probably to make themselves feel better rather than to make a difference. There has to be political mobilization. There has to be greater engagement. There has to be better leadership, frankly, on the part of Muslim Americans within the Gaza, the West Bank, and frankly, within the American electorate.
That's a very good point to highlight, that really it's not very much spoken about in the media about this, and also for me as well, that it's very kind of shocking to know that this kind of difference between the people who are protesting against what's happening in Gaza is sometimes more non-Islamic than Muslims, which is really unreal. Thank you very much, Mr. Moran, for this insight. And we want move now and give the floor to Mr. Ahmed Al-Nuaimi. Mr. Ahmed Al-Nuaimi is UAE human rights advocate. Mr. Ahmed, are you there?
Yes. Hi.
Yeah, please, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank Arab Organization for Human Rights and everyone here in the panel. Thank you for your words and even the support for the human rights in the world, especially in Gaza. Today, we are actually, the humanity is suffered for what is happening in Gaza, and no one actually can avoid that or can take no responsibility. We are all responsible to support the people of Gaza. Unfortunately, when I'm talking here, I am a person who is from the United Arab Emirates. And if I cover what is the United Arab Emirates has been doing since what happened in Gaza in October, it is really something shame that I have to talk about. But it is not something new in the United Arab Emirates, because the government now used to be violence against the human rights. And I will give you some examples of that. But first of all, at the time that we hear the voice, the free voice from the all the world, asking or calling for cease the fire and for stopping the genocide that happened in Gaza, we saw the United Arab Emirates Authority supporting the crime there. How is that? Last December, we heard about the bridge land comes from the United Arab Emirates to solve the problem in Israel, which has a problem actually in, as you know, the Red Sea, where they could not get what they want to get from that way. So they open a new way to solve the problem of Israel, which actually we know it's the time to punish this government, to support the people of Gaza who are dying because of nothing, actually. Dying in front of us, starving every day from hunger. They are isolated from all the world, and they are bombed every day, as we see. I don't want to explain that because it is very obvious for everyone, but it shocked us as Arab and as Muslim that we see this country, our country, unfortunately, to support this crime. And when I say supporting this crime, we have to know that in this year, only in this year, the United Arab Emirates get 80% from the trade exchange between the normalized countries in the region. It gets 80%.
Can you make it, Mr. Noemi, can you make this more clear? There is a kind of trade between the normalizing Arab countries and Israel, and the Emirates is taking 80% of this trade from Israel. Yeah, okay, so we can see.
This is what I mean. So it's hard for me as Emirati to hear about that. This is our money, and this is our country, which is now as a gate for this crime, as a supporter of what is happening in Gaza by the hand of Israel. Let's go more deeper than that. That why the United Arab Emirates is give that offer for this government, the Israeli government with Netanyahu this day. It is actually very obvious. Comes few weeks ago, they announced about the day after the war, what would happen. And they said that the United Arab Emirates government will be in charge in Gaza. And they will take the responsibility of Gaza government. It is very clear. There is a deal under the table between the United Arab Emirates and Israel and the United States. Let's go back a little bit in the history to know how did that happen and how did that start. In 2001, a group of people of United Arab Emirates people, they show some sign, some milestones of going to the normalization with Israel. So they established an association which is anti-Zionism at that time. Establishing that organization, it wasn't welcomed by the government, but because it was in the civil society, they gave some, at that time, there was some free area to work as the people of the United Arab Emirates. But in 2011, everything was changed because the plan was very clear for the United Arab Emirates government. So they banned it and they took over that association. They closed that association. In 2012, they started to arrested the activists and all the human rights people. They took them to unknown place. Actually, one of them, my brother. I was out of the country at that time. I was in London, so I was lucky, alhamdulillah. But my name was with them because all of them were my friends. They were arrested, and they the court took a place to face a bigger problem, saying that they are terrorists without any evidence. But it is, as you know, it's under the security department, the intelligence department, and everything went very fast to give them sentences between 7 years to 10 years. Okay, this is not the end of the story. At that time, we found out that they were going for normalization with Israel and to support their crimes. And we knew that the crime of Israel government, it's not starting in 7th of October. No, it's actually it was from 1987 and before that, before they established their states. Now they start to keep the normalization grow gradually in the United Arab Emirates by sport and something like that. They knew those activists will not be quiet with that, and will not be quiet with the right of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian land. And they will be anti-normalization with the people who occupy our country and our people as well. They are suffering every day, as we know, and maybe every month they have a new war in Gaza, and even in the other lands in the in Palestine. Then in 2021, they came up with the normalization. So did they release those people? What shocked us, all the people actually, they completed their sentences, but no one released, because they want to increase their relationship with this criminal that we see every day, and they don't want any people to talk about that. So they extend that to have a new trial for the people who spend more than 10 years in the jail. They find themselves facing a new crime, saying that they establish a new organization, a new terrorist organization, while they were in the jail. So they get sentenced, new sentences. Some of them get life in prison, and some of them get years. Just, yeah, please.
Mr. Naimi, thank you very much for shedding lights on the situation, the human rights situation in UAE, one of the countries which is normalizing with Israel. And one point is not just doing harm. UAE is not just doing harm to the people of Gaza by making the siege more difficult and the suffering of Gazan people much, much more worse. But the point is that even the people of Emirates themselves, inside Emirates, are being harmed by the normalization efforts from UAE. So everybody over there in Gaza and United Emirates are really having some effect of what's happened by the UAE government. Mr. Naimi, thank you very much for your contribution. And now, because Mr. Stephen, uh, Professor Stephen Hughes is a bit in a hurry, so we can give him the floor. Mr. Hughes is a professor of international security and foreign policy at the University of San Francisco. Professor Stephen, please. Professor Stephen, are you there?
Yes, but his mic is mute.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, I
That's fine. Yeah,
need
go
to step
ahead.
out just for a couple minutes later, but I should be back in time for the question and answer period. But I wanted to go and give my presentation now.
Please.
What we're seeing, we're seeing this pattern again, that there will be a ceasefire proposal from the United States or others. Hamas agrees. Israel says no. The U.S. changes the proposal to meet Israeli demands. Israel still refuses to accept it, but then the United States blames Hamas for rejecting it. I mean, it's interesting. For months, the U.S. rejected the idea of a ceasefire categorically, vetoed otherwise unanimous UN Security Council resolutions calling for a ceasefire. Was one of only 9 countries in the UN General Assembly to vote against a ceasefire. But there's a lot of pressure from the American public and the international community for the United States to end its rejection of a ceasefire. So then the United States started saying, okay, we support a ceasefire. But it's kind of like them saying we support a 2-state solution, which Washington only very reluctantly agreed to say after, again, many decades of domestic and international pressure. They're willing to say they accept it, but they won't do anything to pressure Israel to make it possible. So you can have it both ways. So you have people, saying that the Biden and Harris are working round the clock for a ceasefire, when in fact it's very clear all they need to say is that we will suspend military aid to Israel until they agree to the ceasefire terms originally proposed by the United States, which does not include maintaining Israeli occupation troops in Gaza, which does not mean that Israel can resume the bombing after a few months. I mean, this is it's a trap, and I'm stunned at the number of people who are fairly fairly progressive in their politics, Democratic supporters who keep falling for this. I mean, it reminds me so much of how the Reagan administration would claim they were working for peace agreement in Central America while continuing to arm the brutal Salvadoran junta and the Nicaragua Contras, which are essentially a terrorist group. And it's very hard right now because here in the United States, the excitement of the changed presidential race and the conventions have largely pushed Gaza out of the headlines. And there's some disturbing things. I should let me talk about the Democrats though. I am active in the Democratic Party myself. While Arab governments have long agreed to recognize Israel in return for the end of the occupation, the Democratic platform appears to endorse Trump's efforts to undermine any leverage Arab states might have in supporting Palestinian statehood by pushing them to recognize Israel beforehand and to strengthen U.S. support for these autocratic regimes. Now, a survey of U.S. Middle East scholars revealed that nearly 3/4 of us recognize that the so-called Abraham Accords put together by Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, had actually had a negative impact on the prospects of peace, with only 6% saying it has had a positive impact. The Democratic platform, however, praises Biden for having, quote, directed his administration to build on the Abraham Accords and attempting to, quote, expand a historic normalization deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. In other words, the Democratic Party is saying that Jared Kushner is right and the overwhelming majority of Middle East scholars are wrong. They are saying that we should push for this crazy defense pact, which according to reports, could involve a formal defense treaty and nuclear technology and things like that, to this brutal misogynist family dictatorship. And don't let anybody tell you it's to defend them from Iran. Saudi Arabia already has 6 times the military budget that Iran does, even though they're a much smaller country. And if you include UAE and the other Gulf states, it's more like 9 times Iran's military budget. Now, those of you who are, but this is the negative side. On the positive side, and let me just preface this by saying that those of you who are familiar with my work, and you can check out my website, stephenzunas.org, you know that I've written and spoken extensively about the betrayal of the Democratic Party of its basic liberal values that it espouses regarding human rights, international law, and democracy when it comes to Palestine. So I'm a skeptic. But I do want to show some signs of hope. That despite her hawkish record as a U.S. Senator and some of her statements as Vice President, Kamala Harris, I really do believe, would be tougher on Israel than President Joe Biden. Don't expect any dramatic break with the current administration's policies in the course of the campaign. And the reason is that it's extremely difficult for a sitting vice president to be elected president in general. Only 3 out of 4 have tried since the early 19th century, and only 4 have tried since the early 19th century, and 3 of them lost. The trick is you have to find a balance between asserting your own agenda and not appearing disloyal by contradicting their administration's positions. This is particularly true on foreign policy. And according to those who know her, Harris is going to try to emphasize her independence from Biden without breaking with him. The Washington Post reported that how Harris has pushed the rest of the Biden administration to more heavily consider Palestinian suffering in its response to Israel's war in Gaza, lambasting the civilian death toll, calling for Israel to allow more aid into the territory, more forcefully and empathetically than Biden about Palestinian rights. Following her meeting on July 25th with Netanyahu, which she described as frank, she underscored her middle ground by reiterating Israel's right to self-defense and the imperative of releasing hostages, while highlighting the massive civilian casualties and ongoing suffering and the urgency of ending the war. In her speech accepting the Democratic nomination last week, Harris pledged to work for a future where Palestinians can, quote, realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. It brought one of the biggest cheers of the night. I can't imagine Biden being
Professor Stephen.
Yeah.
Stephen, thank you very much for your words, and I think you said that you have some commitment now.
No, let me just finish up with something real quick. I'm just gonna have to step out for a few minutes, then I'll be back.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. But from the near of from the start of near the start of Israel's bombing campaign, Harris was the first high-ranking Biden official to speak out against the high civilian death toll. She was the first to publicly call for a ceasefire and insist that Israel limit civilian casualties. In June, while other administration officials were unconditionally praising an Israeli raid that freed 4 hostages, she highlighted that more than 270 Palestinians were tragically killed during that attack. And along with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and CIA Director Bill Burns, Harris has been among those within Biden's inner circle who have tried unsuccessfully to push him to get tougher on Netanyahu. And another good sign, the vice president's constitutional role as president of the Senate, because of that, they normally preside over joint sessions of Congress, especially those hosting a foreign leader. And she used the excuse of having another engagement, but Harris's absence during Netanyahu's July 24th speech was significant and led harsh criticisms by both the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and Donald Trump, who've insisted that despite Harris's outspoken opposition to anti-Semitism and being married to a Jewish man, she was totally against the Jewish people. They've even attacked her Jewish stepchildren for raising money for UNRWA.
Okay. Professor Stevens, thank you very much for giving us some very rare positive views about what's going to happen inside all these kind of tragedies. Thank you very much, Professor Steven. And now I may give the floor to Ms. Sarah Flounders, co-director of the International Action Center. Ms. Sarah, are you there?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, please. You have the mic. Go ahead.
And first, I want to thank the Arab Organization in the UK for today's program and a whole number of educational programs over these terrible months. Normalization of genocide is not an oversight. It's not just ignoring this horrendous daily crime against humanity. It is a conscious erasure of all discussion and information. It is the assassination, execution, martyrdom of courageous journalists operating on the ground in Gaza and in the West Bank. It's censorship without parallel in the US. It's a closing of tens of thousands of Twitter X accounts, Facebook accounts, YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram accounts, interruption of Zoom calls. All social media is privately owned by billionaires who are Zionist owners, and they operate with US imperialist interest first and foremost. It's consciously prohibiting information on the complete destruction of hospitals, medical clinics, schools, universities. It's also an erasure by disrupting again and again the refugee population, forced to move again. Now, here in the US, we saw in glaring detail in both the Republican and Democratic Party conventions, both banned any mention of Palestine, any opposition to US-funded and equipped total war in Gaza today. Absolute censored conventions. No Palestinian or even Muslim speaker allowed at the DNC. Now, according to the New York Times, Kamala, and they support her, Kamala Harris gave the most hawkish acceptance speech ever presented. You can dress it up any way you want. US policy and their entire strategy is to continue the war and to provide Israel with every possible way of continuing the war. US aircraft carriers ring all of Western Asia, every possible body of water, and yet they fear to fire because they fear the firestorm of response, of wider resistance. And that is what they fear. The rulings of the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, important as they are, and they are important, but they're ignored with a shrug. They're barely reported in the US corporate media. So it is up to the people of the world and the people of the US to continue, but to at the same time recognize it will not come from either political party. The millions in the streets, in demonstrations and encampments who face mass arrests, suspensions, cut in financial aid, they're the ones that make the change. And we should remember, during the very height of the Vietnam War, when millions and millions were active, there was never even a resolution passed in the US Congress or the Democratic or then the Republican president opposing the continued bombing until the war was over, until US troops had left. The US only withdrew from that war because there was a mass movement that was too overwhelming. US soldiers and the US recruited Vietnamese soldiers literally refused to fight. AWOL soldiers exceeded US soldiers willing to be drafted. Now, this is what's happening in Israel today. The Zionist state is collapsing. It's pulling itself apart. The level of internal dissension, people are leaving. And I think this confirms that change comes from below, as every political movement in the US and also in Arab history, it's come from below. The world movement has to keep going, keep fighting, and keep defending the Palestinian resistance, which is surely a movement that has come from below and from the grassroots.
Ms. Flounders, since you are co-director of the International Action Center, now we can see all the international resolutions and all the ICC resolution or ICJ resolutions are being denied by the superpowers, by America and that. So there is a kind of pessimism from the international community that these resolutions will be applied either now or after a while or on the day after. So is there another way, since you are at something like International Action Center, apart from these formal resolutions, is there something like more practical that we can say that it's kind of duty now, the priority now for moving or something which can affect this, especially these Arab countries who are normalizing with Israel as well, and they are repressing their people in the streets just to pass this kind of relations with Israel. Is there something you can suggest we can do?
Well, I was suggesting what we can do, and that is to continue to support in every way possible, legally in every way, publicity in every way, the movement that's been in the streets. And as the campuses open again, this is what will push the change through, and to demand that these resolutions already passed by the court be abided by, be listened to, be enforced. That's what's not happening. They're just casual shrug. Oh, well, something was decided. It's not even reported here, but it is reported within the movement. It's an international movement of resistance. And I think our role is to highlight that, and actually also to highlight the statements coming from the Palestinian resistance, who are risking everything, life itself, in the millions, in order to keep fighting. So this is where change comes from, and recognizing it with support will make a difference. And not saying, oh, we only got to rely on one political party or another. We have no choice. We got to do the best deal we can. If all that energy went into supporting the mass movement, the students, the people who are in the streets, and those who are in the courts, because I'm not against supporting any one of these movements or resolutions or union resolutions or actions coming on Labor Day. When the UN session in late September is in session, all kinds of demonstrations are being planned. When Netanyahu is here, when other co-conspirators are here. So I think all of that is extremely important, and that's where our confidence should be, our determination should be.
Yeah, because since there's no legal or moral responsibility on these kind of countries, they are supporting what's happening in Gaza. I mean, some people think that there is no way out, that they cannot apply these resolutions. They cannot even try to move or touch their morals to try to sympathize with what's happening in Gaza. So sometimes it's reaching an impasse that what to do. I mean, both ways are really blocked. So hopefully this
I agree. It's being blocked. It's being blocked here. It's being blocked in all of the Arab countries. It's being blocked. And yet, when you look at the support that has come from Yemen, that has come from Lebanon, it does show what is possible. And it will take mass pressure in the countries that are conciliating with this. Of course, they face enormous US pressure. They face all kinds of economic, political, and military pressure and threats of coups and all kinds of things. Yes, they do face that. But it's, again, in my opinion, it is the movement from below that can force those leaders, because even now they try to speak out of both sides of their mouth because they fear the mass movement. And as that movement becomes stronger, they will become stronger.
That's very good advice. Thank you very much for your contribution, Mr. Salah Flounders. Thank you very much. And now we move to Dr. Lex Tackenberg, former Director of UNRWA Operations. Dr. Tackenberg.
I'm here, and
Dr.
thank you.
Tackenberg, hello and welcome. And actually, we are a bit anxious to know what's going on or what to do, especially since UNRWA was one of the victims organizations of what happened in Gaza, so we can have like an insightful view of the humanitarian situation, what happened and what we can do, please.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank the Arab Organization for Human Rights for inviting me and for indeed having convened a series of events like today since the 7th October. This is very much appreciated. I'm also, although I worked for a long time with UNRWA, I'm today sending you greetings from Arab Renaissance for Democracy and Development, the organization for whom, as senior advisor, I lead a program on the question of Palestine. I'm happy to say something about UNRWA, but I would like, if you allow me, to make a couple of sort of comments on where we are 10 months after, or more than 10 months after 7 October, after genocidal, horrific war in Gaza, and sort of give you a couple of perspectives that have come to my mind as I was invited for this event. I mean, first, as we are witnessing, and as also other speakers have alluded to, a ceasefire, even with the latest effort, does not seem to be within reach. The war has, for reasons primarily related to Netanyahu's personal and political interest, moved into a war of attrition, also involving and also extending to Lebanon, to the ongoing engagement between Hezbollah and Israel, and then the Houthis and Iran, and Syria. It doesn't seem likely that there will be a very rapid end to the ongoing hostilities. On the other hand, that should not prompt us to think that, you know, we are sort of stuck and things have not moved or are not moving. I strongly believe that 7 October, the events since 7 October, have dramatically and irrevocably changed the status quo with respect to the sort of the broader, what I would describe, question of Palestine, and that impacts everything. On the Israeli front, and the previous speaker was also, and I think several speakers were alluding to, Israel is sort of disintegrating from within. There is there was already a significant rift between sort of the Democrats, the liberal Democrats, between brackets, Democrats for Jewish Israelis only, and the autocratic religious nationalists, and that rift has only dramatically increased since the war in Gaza started. With, on the one hand, Israel society entirely, as a whole, sort of coming behind the war effort and the ongoing genocide, but at the same time, dramatic disruptions and disintegration within Israeli society, with the prospect of a civil war coming closer by the day. So there's a lot of change there. I mean, Israeli society remains stuck in the clock has sort of stopped on 7 October. There's still hundreds of thousands of people in the country internally displaced, and there's a total lack of normalcy. So that's one important thing, and that will and that will be an important factor in what is going to happen in the weeks and months and beyond to come. Then another important thing that we have seen, and Ken Ross and others have also referred to, the whole effort to holding Israel accountable for its crimes and
Yeah, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
yes, sorry,
Go
I
on.
got out.
No. We can see and we can hear you clearly. You can go on.
Yeah, I'm back in a second.
Okay.
I'm with you. Just had to make sure that I don't get interrupted again.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the second point I was making was the significant and I would say equally dramatic advancements with respect to accountability, holding Israeli individuals accountable for international crime, also holding Israel as a state accountable for the illegality of the occupation, for the settlement enterprise, as the International Court of Justice has recently determined. The genocide case, the arrest warrants that are now likely to be authorized in the coming weeks against Biden, against Netanyahu, Gallant, and Sinwar. All of this is reinforcing each other and having first, it represents a tremendous push, especially the ICJ advisory opinion, a tremendous push for the BDS movement and the broader global movement for solidarity with Palestine and Palestinians. And I totally agree with the previous speaker about the enormous importance of that in moving things forward. The totality of the legal proceedings will also have, a very significant impact on third states in the Arab world, third states in the Western world, which have to come to terms with the sort of the dramatic conclusion that the International Court of Justice reached in July. And in turn, it will also, further impact the business community that has already been triggered by BDS over the last 15 years, but that will, has received a further dramatic sort of wake-up call through the ruling of the International Court of Justice. The next step is to see what the General Assembly will do with it in September. The advisory opinion is advisory to the General Assembly, so it is the General Assembly that has, through a resolution, to really, benchmark where we are with respect to sort of accountability and
Dr.
the just
Dr. Leck, Dr. Lex, I have a question here. Do you think that these countries who are supporting the occupation now and supporting Israel, especially the Arab countries who are normalizing with Israel, can these countries can be brought to justice one day or another? We're always talking about the America, Israel, European Union, or whoever, but we haven't talked about the Arab countries, especially the surrounding and United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, who are normalizing, and in a way they are helping Israel in what's going on. Do they have something apart from the moral responsibility? Do they have any kind of
Well,
legal
I think there are
responsibility?
indeed, there are three sets of consequences. I mean, one is moral, another one is political, and the third one is sort of legal. Nicaragua tried on the legal front to take Germany to court for its complicity, and that case remains pending. It did not lead to interim measures to instruct Germany to refrain from continuing its weapon delivery, but the case remains pending. And will move forward in parallel with the principal genocide case that South Africa launched against Israel. And both cases will take several years to sort of reach maturity, to reach hearings and rulings. But I'm convinced at the time that with the unprecedented intensity of the genocide that is being perpetrated against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, that issues of accountability vis-a-vis third state will move forward. But it doesn't have to wait until that. I mean, if we look at the very strong findings of the International Court of Justice with respect to the illegality of the occupation, but also the principles that the International Court of Justice has invoked in that case, which extend to apartheid, but which also have an impact on already the ongoing genocide proceedings, which the ICJ referred to. This will start having political impact. Politicians are increasingly getting nervous and increasingly getting uncomfortable with the legal state of affairs vis-a-vis Israel. You see that the UK government, the incoming UK government undid the démarche of the previous government towards the ICC, trying sort of to stop the arrest warrants. You see in Scandinavian countries, in many countries, you see that there is active consideration
Exactly, yes.
of change. So yes, there will be on the longer term horizon criminal accountability also for third state, but in the shorter term, the political impact is already being felt as we speak.
I see. Thank you very much, Dr. Lex, for your contribution. And may I just ask Mr. Jim Moran, may I ask the same question? Do you think that not only Israel and the United States and other superpowers who are supporting Israel, at least the Arab countries who are normalizing with these Arab countries are accomplices in this genocide in Gaza? Is there a hope that they can be brought to justice or have any criminal accountability now or in the future?
No, there isn't. If I could apply a technical term to this international legalizing, it's all bullshit. Will be no accountability. The European settlers were never held accountable for the genocide of the indigenous people of North America. The United States was never held accountable for the millions of Vietnamese that were unnecessarily killed, or for the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis who were killed because American soldiers thought we were getting them back for what they did to us on 9/11. There is no real justice unless people demand it. So if I could suggest, sir, I don't know enough to know you well enough to call you by your first name, but if I could suggest, the Arab world is complicit in what is happening. Qatar is doing everything it can to bring about a ceasefire and a release of hostages. But where is Saudi Arabia and where is the Emirates? What they're doing is waiting for these Abrahamic Accords to take place so that they can bring more Israeli money invested into their vanity projects in Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but the reality is the only real leverage is held by the Arab world. If Saudi Arabia were to do what King Abdullah did at one point in the 70s, is to hold the provision of energy, oil, embargo that from the world market, that just the threat of that would send the European and American economies into a tailspin. They depend upon the Arab oil and some gas, mostly oil. And much of it is in Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. If they were to threaten to hold that back until there's an absolute ceasefire, until there's some justice executed in Gaza and the West Bank, that would happen because that's real leverage. But the reality is that for the Saudis and the Emirati leadership, not the people on the street, but the leadership, Palestine is a pain in the butt. They don't want to deal with the Palestinians because they don't feel a responsibility. It seems to be only the people on the street that care about the injustice, the suffering, the genocide of fellow Muslims. And that's been the problem with the Palestinians since 1948. And that's why we don't have any real justice, because the real leverage is not being exerted.
I see. Mr. Salah Flounders, do you share the same opinion with Mr. Moore?
Well, the same sentiment, let's say. But I will say that the problem, every one of these regimes based on money, on profit, on enormous privilege, while their own population doesn't get to share in it, is that the U.S. is now an oil exporting country. They are actually competitors with Saudi Arabia, with the Gulf states. And that is a very different situation than the 1970s. However, these countries have lots of other places where they can sell their oil and at the same time stand with Palestine. And that is the kind of leverage. They need a wider view of the problem. To continue to run after U.S. support and U.S. weapons, what has it gotten them besides debt and more debt and a huge separation from their own population? At the same time, I think when we're looking at the Arab world, there's a huge divide. There's a real dichotomy going on. We can look at a rising resistance in Iraq. Gee, that wasn't there before. And it is coming from the ground up of refusing to be complicit. We could look at Syria. We could look at the very missiles fired from Lebanon, from Hezbollah, just yesterday. Of course, we should look at Yemen. And Iran is a real factor in this as a Persian country. So there's a big divide that is happening. These regimes based on privilege are like stuck in the past. They should look at the new situation. They don't need to bend their knee anymore to the U.S. empire and its demands and to make way for Zionism and its crimes. They don't need to do that. They're selling their oil, majority, to the east, not to the west. And they sort of haven't come into a line politically with the new situation that they now face. So anyway, that's my opinion. But I think it is again, I do think it's their population from below that they should also be fearful of, because
Yeah, it can
a
be
major disruption may still happen.
it can be the key word for today, which is population from below. And one last word from Professor Stephen
Yeah,
Zulis. Do you
I
want
would have
to?
to agree to this as well. And I look at the
Ah,
very,
okay, go ahead.
I really, I would emphasize that, you know, the U.S. support for these Arab regimes, that propping them up to keep in power, is very much part of the problem. I mean, despite all the rhetoric that we heard at the convention and from the Biden administration, you know, that we stand for freedom and rules-based international order, and they're like 57% of the world's dictatorships, most of them in the Middle East and North Africa, receive military aid or arms transfers or other security assistance from the United States. And I mean, the fact is we've supported other genocidal wars like Turkey against the Kurds in the 1990s, Saudi Arabia against Yemen just a few years ago. Israel's not unique in that regard. Similarly, it's not the only occupation we support. I mean, the United States not only supports Morocco's illegal occupation of the nation of Western Sahara, a full member state of the African Union, but the U.S. became, you know, the first country to formally recognize that illegal annexation. You know, just like the U.S. being the first country to and only country to recognize Israel's illegal annexation of Syria's Golan region. And then you have Biden has the nerve to say, oh, we stand for a rules-based international order and we have to support Ukraine because no country can unilaterally change its international borders or expand its territory by force. And you know, this is and so really that's why I, you know, long argued that that we should we shouldn't see that Israel is I mean, there are obviously a lot of aspects about the U.S.-Israeli relationship that are singular, but at the same time, you know, it's very much part and parcel with U.S. foreign policy and our refusal to support, you know, basic principles, international law, and human rights and the like. And frankly, you know, AIPAC makes it difficult, and Zionist lobby makes it difficult for us to change U.S. policy. We'd have more allies in Congress if it weren't for AIPAC. You know, there'd be more debate, less censorship. But frankly, I think the overall thrust of U.S. policy would be more or less the same. I mean, when has the United States ever cared about human rights or international law? You know, when they're being violated by by a U.S. ally. And you know, despite the positive things I said about Harris, you know, a few minutes ago, she could end up very much like Obama in saying the right things much of the time, but really failing to do anything about it. And that's
Yeah,
where the
exactly.
grassroots has to come in and pressure her to live up to what she
From
claims.
below. Thank you very much, Professor Stephen. And so at the end of this very fruitful webinar, I would like to thank each and everybody and who could speak and take part and engage. And thank you very much for your precious time and your input. And we hope we can meet again in coming webinars from this organization. And at the end, I'll tell you goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.